Another segment about the so-called war on drugs. And by the way, at the end of the show, I'm going to mention some of the tweets and emails I've received from these pothead types. If you really want abuse, insults, threats, and just inability to spell basic English, you'll see that. That comes a bit later. David Raynes, let me read what I have here because there's some up on the prompter, but very impressive stuff here. Retired in 2000, 36 years in customs and excise in Britain, 25 years of them spent dealing with fraud and drug smuggling, really knows how these things work, trying to keep a country safe from gangsters and criminals. And you might be surprised where he stands on this. He joins us now from London. Welcome to you, David.
Good evening, or afternoon, is it there?
Right, no, it's evening here. It's always evening here.
Right.
Now, Washington State today decriminalized, and many people are saying this is a wonderful thing, but this is just part of an ongoing war in most of the English-speaking world and elsewhere to legalize or decriminalize. You had all these years' experience keeping out drugs and bad people wanting to sell drugs. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I'm against legalization and I'm against decriminalization. You're right, there's been a battle, I call it the war on drugs policy, that's existed for the last 20 years or so. In the UK, it really got going in relation to cannabis in the mid-90s when we had one of our major broadsheet newspapers, The Independent on Sunday, calling for legalization. And a lot of people are crowded around that, some big money coming in from Soros, George Soros and other people. We've had a really vigorous push for legalization, decriminalization. And what's happened in the UK is quite interesting, I suppose, to people in Canada. That strong push ended in 2003-04 with our Home Secretary, I suspect that's your Interior Minister,
sort of, yeah,
suggesting that cannabis would be downgraded. And it was downgraded from Category B to Category C under our law.
You know, it's fascinating you mentioned that newspaper, The Independent on Sunday, which is very much an upper middle class newspaper. You mentioned George Soros because the drug lobby like to paint it that they are the victims. They have huge amounts of money and media and propaganda and showbiz behind them. And those of us who say, well, let's just think again about this. Let me be candid with you. On a personal level, I couldn't care less what someone does in their own time. If they want to get high in their own house, nothing to do with me. It's really about national policy and what it'll do to our culture. But I want to ask you, as someone who's spent more than a quarter of a century enforcing the law, we hear the argument that if cannabis, for example, was legalized, decriminalized, it would destroy organized crime, it would not hurt anyone, it would make life easier, and it would save a lot of money. Is that true?
It's not true, and it's one of the big fictions of the war on drugs policy that if you legalise it, you'll take the criminality out of it. I mean, a lot of my time was spent dealing with cigarette trafficking, and you have a big cigarette trafficking problem in Canada. When I was in charge of a UK region, we spent much more of our money dealing with tobacco trafficking, with 25% at that time of the UK's tobacco smuggled, counterfeit, or both. And organised crime isn't going to go away. Organised crime is not going to pack up if you legalise drugs. They'll just be in competition and they'll always be able to undercut legitimate trade. So it's a complete and utter fiction. And a lot of people have put a lot of money into it. Soros is one, but there are others. There's a guy in the States called Peter Lewis, put money into it. We've actually changed now on cannabis. We downgraded it to Category C, and then in 2008-09 we had a big debate in our advisory council, and the government reclassified it back at B, where it always was. And we've suffered, actually. We had a big increase in cannabis crime. We had tobacco factories growing. We'd never had that. You'd had it in Canada for a time, but we'd never had it. And it's now a big industry, and the cannabis has changed in nature. You can ask me about that if you wish. I mean, it's substantially not the product it was in the 60s.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're always told it is natural, which is such a facile comment, because all sorts of things. And I mean, cancer is natural, for goodness sake, because something is natural. Tobacco doesn't mean it's going to be beneficial, doesn't mean it won't be harmful. But you make a good point here. This notion that if you legalize and you introduce government and state, thus taxation, that people will say, wonderful, we're paying more. I mean, prostitution in the Netherlands, for example, there's a whole group, a whole culture of prostitutes who say, we're not paying taxes to the government, we'll go outside of the system. And, of course, you'll have illegal smuggling of cannabis. But I tell you that there's a report. Whenever we say that carcinogens, links to cancer, ill health, psychosis, that there's a lot of information coming out now, we're told, oh, you didn't do your research. No, we did our research, but we simply disagree with you. In Canada, the police have been told through the scientific community that 3 hours after smoking cannabis compared to 3 hours after taking too much alcohol, you're twice as likely to drive a car irresponsibly and lead to an accident or a crash. So there's all the arguments, well, how do we monitor cannabis use? Do you allow someone in a car? What do you do? Do you arrest? Do you challenge? Do you charge?
Well, the only reason for taking cannabis is to get intoxicated. I mean, alcohol's causing a lot of damage in both our societies, I guess, but cannabis is just to get intoxicated. And the big problem here, and the reason our National Director of Mental Health wanted cannabis reclassified upwards, was the harm it was causing to youth. We got to a situation in the early 70s when Tony Blair was in the late 90s and early 2000s, when Tony Blair was our Prime Minister. We had young children, 12, 13, 14, using cannabis on the way to school, at school, and on the way home from school. Those children become beyond teaching. Teachers have no ability to teach them. They lose the ability to learn, and our prisons are full of people said to be mentally ill. And a lot of that starts with cannabis. Of course, alcohol and crack cocaine come in later, but alcohol is the drug that first damages those kids and makes them unteachable. And I guess you're having the same problem. Certainly here, we realised it, and our government reversed the position, reclassified cannabis upwards, against the cries of some of the people, the legalisation lobby. And I don't expect it to be legalised here or decriminalised here very soon. In fact, I'm fairly confident both our main political parties will not do that. Now, Monday next, we've got a big report out from our Home Affairs Select Committee. That's a committee of Parliament. Yeah. I expect them to say some things that I don't like, but I don't think the government will pay any attention.
Mm. We must get you back on the show because it's so important to hear from people who are balanced, objective, no particular propaganda or money behind them, simply have seen it firsthand and have some intelligent answers rather than just hallucinations. Thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.